Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you worked, you were always overlooked? Like the more you gave, the less you got in return. Imagine pouring your heart into everything you do, only for the people who should love you most to dismiss you as nothing more than a background character in their perfect little story. What would it take for you to stop trying to fit into someone else's narrative? What if, one day, you finally realized your worth, not through the eyes of those who never saw you, but through your own eyes? This is the story of Jessica, a woman who spent years hiding in the shadows of her family, always the one who gave, never the one who received. But one phone call, one moment of cold rejection would change everything. This is her story of standing up, breaking free, and finally choosing herself. On her mother's birthday, Jessica was told to stay away, to avoid causing discomfort during the family celebration. But what was meant to be a quiet, selfless act of support turned into a wake-up call that would change the course of her life. Through silent sacrifice, Jessica had always been the one her family turned to when they needed something. Money, favors, someone to hold things together. But when she needed them, they were nowhere to be found. That was the moment she realized she had been invisible in her own family for too long. Now it was time for the truth to surface. Jessica Warren always felt like the second choice. Growing up, her older sister Claire was the one who shined in the spotlight. Claire was everything their parents admired. Graceful, polished, and charming. Meanwhile, Jessica, with her quiet ambition and love for her work in biotech, seemed to fade into the background. No matter how hard she tried to earn their praise, her achievements were always overlooked, pushed aside in favor of the next thing Claire did. Even as an adult, Jessica's career, her passion for building a successful biotech startup, was brushed off with a simple, "Oh, that's nice, dear. You're doing something with your life, right?" Her parents' attention was always on Claire's latest accomplishments. Her perfect job, her flawless appearance, her charming boyfriend who was now a successful CFO. But Jessica was different. She wasn't flashy. She didn't crave the attention. All she wanted was to be seen, not as a provider but as a person with value, with dreams, with needs. She thought if she just worked hard enough, stayed quiet, and helped whenever they needed her, one day they would recognize her for who she really was. One day, her family would see that she was enough. But that day never came. Instead, it was on her mother's birthday, when Jessica was just trying to do the right thing, help out like she always did, that the true weight of her family's indifference hit her like a slap in the face. Her father's voice, cold and dismissive, on the other end of the phone. "You don't need to come home this year. Claire is bringing her new boyfriend, and it would just make things awkward. It's best if you stay away." In that moment, Jessica's heart dropped. The finality in his voice, the lack of care, was enough to shatter her belief in the family she had always tried to please. The truth was clear now. To them, she wasn't family. She was just the one who picked up the pieces when things fell apart. So, Jessica did something she had never done before. She stopped giving. No more money. No more fixing their problems. She sat in silence, letting the world unfold without her, for the first time in her life. And in that silence, she found her power. What happens when you stop trying to fit into someone else's story? What happens when you finally choose yourself? Jessica would soon find out. And by the end of this story, you will see how one woman's silence, and the truth that followed, was louder than anything she had ever said. It was late March when everything changed for Jessica. The air had that crisp, early spring bite, and her mind was still buzzing from the successful funding round she had just closed for her biotech startup. It was a huge accomplishment, one she was proud of, and for the first time in a while, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of a weekend off, something she had been working towards for months. She called her dad to let him know she was coming home early to help out for her mother's birthday. It was something she always did, whether it was picking up the cake, setting the table, or just being there in the background, making sure everything went smoothly. Jessica had always tried to be the one who quietly carried the weight, the one who made things easier for everyone else. But this time when she called, it wasn't her mom who picked up the phone. It was her dad. "Hey Dad, I'm coming home early to help out for Mom's birthday. Is there anything you need me to bring?" Jessica asked, her voice full of anticipation. There was a long pause on the other end. She could hear him clear his throat, the hesitation hanging in the air. "Nicole, if possible, don't come home this year," he said. His voice strange, almost cold. The words hit Jessica like a wave. She felt her chest tighten, and for a moment, she thought she might have misunderstood. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Her father's voice grew firmer. "Claire's bringing her new boyfriend. He's a CFO, well-spoken, clearly successful. Your job? Well, it's hard to explain. You showing up would just invite comparisons and make things awkward, so it's best you stay home this year." Silence filled the space between them. Jessica gripped the phone harder, a cold sting crawling down her spine. Her breath caught in her throat as she processed what he was saying. "Are you saying I make the family look bad? That I shouldn't come home because I'm an embarrassment?" she asked, her words sharp with hurt. Her father didn't back down. "If you insist on coming, then don't call me your father," he said before hanging up without a second thought. The world around Jessica seemed to blur in that moment. She stared at the phone in her hand, numb. How had it come to this? For years, she had tried to be the daughter they would finally be proud of, quietly sacrificing, endlessly giving. But now, with those simple words, her father had made it clear. She wasn't the daughter they wanted. Sometimes the truth doesn't come in grand moments. It comes in a phone call, a sentence, a realization. This moment was Jessica's awakening, a painful reminder that sometimes, no matter how much we give, we can't force others to see our worth. And sometimes the hardest part isn't the rejection. It's the realization that the effort to belong might have been misplaced all along. Now, as Jessica sat in the silence of her apartment, something began to shift. She wasn't just hurt. She was done. But what would she do next? Would she continue to be the one who always tried, always gave, always made herself invisible to keep the peace? Or would she finally allow herself to be seen? The next part of Jessica's journey would be where everything began to change. Not because she had to fight back, but because she chose to stand still and let the truth reveal itself. For as long as Jessica could remember, she had always been the one to hold things together for her family. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't acknowledged, but she did it anyway. When the bills piled up, Jessica quietly took care of them. When the fridge broke down, Jessica was the one who fixed it. When her father's car broke, she was there with the repair check. She did it all without complaint, because she thought that, in time, her family would notice her. She believed that if she gave enough, if she sacrificed enough, maybe, just maybe, they would see her for who she really was. Her parents, of course, never asked if she could afford it. They simply said, "Claire's struggling after switching jobs. Can you help with this, just this once?" And Jessica always did. Every month, without fail, she would wire them money. Some months it was the regular $600 for utilities and cable. Other times it was more when something unexpected happened, like when her mom said the refrigerator was on the fritz or when her dad's car needed an expensive repair. It wasn't a choice for Jessica. It was just expected. She was the one who made sure everything kept running. For 2 long years, Jessica sent money without ever being asked. She never questioned it. After all, it was family, right? And family, she believed, was the place where you always went back to when things got tough. But as time passed, the silent sacrifices started to weigh heavily on her. It wasn't just the money. It was the emotional toll of constantly being the one to step in when no one else would. Every time there was a family gathering, Jessica would show up, silently filling the gaps left by others. Her sister Claire, always the center of attention, never once acknowledged what Jessica was doing behind the scenes. Her parents were too focused on Claire's perfect life to even notice that Jessica had been silently holding up the family for so long. Jessica's eyes wandered to her laptop one evening, after that fateful phone call from her father. She opened her banking app and scrolled through the long list of transactions. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read each line. There it was. Nearly $15,000 in total contributions to her parents over the last 2 years. Each bill, each expense, each small favor had added up. She hovered over the cancel payment button. With one click, She could sever the invisible thread that had been pulling her into this never-ending cycle of giving. The money wasn't what hurt her. It was the realization that after everything she had given, she had never once been asked how she was. No one had ever cared to check in, not even to ask if she needed help herself. She wasn't just the family's financial lifeline. She was a tool, a safety net, and nothing more. Jessica clicked the button. One by one, the payments stopped. Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to be the one who fixes things, the one who helps everyone else, that we forget to ask if it's okay to help ourselves. We can become so invisible in our role of giving that we start to lose sight of who we are and what we truly need. Jessica's moment of realization, when she stopped giving without expecting anything in return, wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about choosing to step out of the shadows and stop being taken for granted. And now, the real question was, what would she do next? What happens when you finally stop hiding in the background, stop doing everything for everyone else, and start living for yourself? As the days passed, Jessica's silence became her strength. But what she didn't know was that this silence was about to have a ripple effect. It would bring unexpected clarity, and soon the truth about her family and her own life would be revealed. And that truth would change everything. But the first thing she needed to do was embrace the power of saying no. The days leading up to her mother's birthday were filled with silence. Silence that Jessica had intentionally created. She didn't reach out to her parents, didn't call to check in, didn't ask if they needed anything for the celebration. For the first time in her life, Jessica chose to let the silence linger. She knew what it would mean. The phone would ring, the messages would come, but she decided not to answer. She couldn't pretend anymore. Not after the cold dismissal from her father. Not after all the years of being the quiet fixer in the background, invisible yet always there when they needed her. She thought about what might happen. Her family would likely be frustrated. They might wonder why she hadn't called. They might make excuses, pretending that everything was fine, even though they all knew it wasn't. But this time, Jessica wasn't going to be the one to fix things. Her mother's birthday came, and Jessica didn't send a card. No happy birthday message. Nothing. She didn't want to pretend that everything was normal anymore. Didn't want to slip back into the role she had played for years. The one who always gave, always made everything better for everyone else, but who was never seen for the person she truly was. The daughter, the sister, just her. Not the helper, the provider, the fixer. As the clock ticked closer to the evening, Jessica sat by her window, sipping a cup of peppermint tea. The room was calm, and the outside world seemed to be holding its breath, just as she was. No texts came through. No calls. Her phone was quiet, as it had been for days. She had half expected her father to call, demanding that she show up, but the silence remained. Then, just as the clock struck 5 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was her mom. "Nicole, sweetheart, I think the power's out at the house. Can you check for us?" The message read, simple and direct, as if nothing had changed. As if the conversation with her father had never happened. Jessica read the message and set her phone down, the weight of her decision settling into her chest. It wasn't the first time she had been called in to fix things for them. This time, though, Jessica felt a quiet strength in letting it go unanswered. No more jumping into action. No more playing the role that had been forced on her for so long. A few minutes later, another message came through from her father. "No water, no internet. Call the providers. Your mom's freaking out." Jessica stared at the screen, her heart cold but steady. This was it. The moment where she had to decide once and for all to let go of the expectations, the guilt, the responsibility she had carried for so long. It wasn't out of malice, but out of self-preservation. She had given everything, and in return, all she received was the same sense of being invisible. She didn't respond. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is nothing. We are so conditioned to rush in, to fix problems, to make things right for others, that we forget the value of silence. By choosing not to respond, Jessica was not being cruel. She was being kind to herself. She was setting a boundary that she had never allowed herself to set before. And while it felt uncomfortable at first, this silence was the beginning of her reclaiming her own life, her own peace. As Jessica sat quietly in her apartment, she realized that sometimes you don't need to be the one who fixes things. Sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. But the most surprising part of all, the power that came from letting the silence speak for itself. And as she would soon discover, that silence was about to lead her to the truth in ways she could never have imagined. The next step in Jessica's journey was about to unfold. Little did she know, the quiet withdrawal would bring clarity, not just for her, but for her entire family. What came next would challenge everything she had ever known about herself and the people she loved. It was just another quiet day at work for Jessica. She had always found solace in the routine, the rhythm of meetings, the flow of decisions being made, the small wins that built up to something bigger. The noise of her family's expectations, the constant feeling of being invisible at home, seemed a world away when she was in the office. Here, in this space she had helped create, Jessica was someone. She was seen. She was valued. That morning, as she sat in her office sipping coffee, a new email notification popped up. It was from HR regarding a recent staff transfer. New Jersey staff transfer to Boston. Awaiting approval. Jessica opened the email, her mind already moving to the next task when her eyes froze on one name. Liam Prescott. Pause. The name rang a bell, but it wasn't until she saw the position listed under the title, Head of Finance, that it clicked. Liam Prescott was the man Claire had been dating for the past few months. He was the charming CFO that Jessica's family had been so proud of, the one they had been gushing about during every family gathering. Claire had described him as perfect, successful, handsome, and according to her, the one. Jessica leaned back in her chair, a wry smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The irony was thick. The boyfriend her family had been parading around was now about to work for her. She hadn't even known he had applied for a position at her company, let alone that he would be reporting to her. Her first thought was a quiet laugh. Well, isn't life full of surprises? But then, as she read the rest of the email, something in her chest tightened. Jessica didn't know what to make of it. Was it fate? Was it karma? Either way, she couldn't deny the irony of the situation. The man her family had been so eager to impress, the one they had pushed her out of the way for, was about to enter her world in a way that no one expected. She could feel her thoughts swirling, her emotions tangled. But above it all, one thing was clear. Things were about to get very interesting. Later that day, Jessica met with Liam in her office for the first time since she had learned his name would be on the transfer list. He stepped into her office, holding a folder, his expression slightly tense but trying to maintain his usual charm. As soon as their eyes met, Jessica could see the recognition in his eyes, quickly replaced by shock. "Nicole?" he asked, his voice soft, as if unsure whether to speak at all. Jessica stood up from her desk, offering a calm, composed smile. She wasn't fazed, at least not on the outside. "Yes, it's me. Welcome to Pacific Genomics, Liam. I'll be reviewing the financial plan for this quarter. Looking forward to working together," she said with a steady tone, handing him a contract to sign. Liam stood frozen for a moment, the realization sinking in. His face flushed, then turned pale. A million thoughts raced through his mind, but in that brief, awkward silence, the truth was clear. Jessica wasn't just some colleague. She wasn't the quiet, unnoticed sister Claire had made her out to be. She was the boss. The situation was almost too perfect. Jessica had always been invisible to her family, always second to Claire in their eyes. And now, here was Liam, someone who had been part of their world for months, standing in front of her as an employee. Not a partner, not an equal, but under her authority. Liam took the contract from her hand, his fingers brushing slightly against hers. He didn't say anything more. He just nodded quietly and left the room, still processing what had just happened. Life has a funny way of turning things on their head. We spend so much time believing we need to prove ourselves to others, especially to those who don't see us for who we truly are. But sometimes the universe shows us our worth in the most unexpected ways. Jessica didn't need to shout about her success or demand recognition. It came to her quietly, through the most ironic twist of fate, the very person her family had been so proud of was now working for her. Jessica didn't have to do anything. She didn't have to fight or defend her worth. Life was already writing the story. And all she had to do was sit back and let it unfold. The next part of Jessica's journey would be about what happens when the truth is revealed. Not just for her, but for everyone around her. How would her family react when they learned who Jessica really was? Would the silence continue, or would it be the catalyst for a much-needed change? Jessica had no idea. But she knew one thing for certain. Her world was shifting, and she was finally ready to embrace it. As Jessica sat in her quiet apartment, letting the weight of her father's words settle into her bones, something inside her began to shift. For the first time, she wasn't rushing to fix things, to make everything okay for everyone else. She wasn't just the backup, the problem solver, the invisible one. She was done. And as the days passed, Jessica's world began to change. She wasn't just living to fulfill other people's needs anymore. She was starting to live for herself, and it felt terrifying and freeing all at once. But let me ask you this. How many of us have ever felt like Jessica? Invisible in our own families? Do you ever wonder if your worth is only measured by what you can give to others? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment of realization like Jessica's? What would you have done in her shoes? Drop a comment below and share your feelings, because sometimes the hardest thing to do is to choose yourself. The day of Liam's first meeting with Jessica felt like any other. The office hummed with the usual energy. Conversations, the click of keyboards, phones ringing in the background. But for Jessica it was different. The weight of the situation hung heavy on her shoulders. She had always kept a low profile in her family, never drawing attention to her success, always playing the part of the quiet, hard-working daughter. But today, everything was about to change. Liam's scheduled meeting with her was set for 10 a.m. Jessica was sitting at her desk, reviewing some reports, when her assistant knocked gently and let him in. She looked up to see Liam standing in the doorway, holding a folder in his hand, clearly nervous but trying to mask it with a smile. "Good morning, Jessica," Liam said, his voice tentative. "I wasn't sure if I was at the right office. This place is bigger than I expected." Jessica smiled softly, rising from her desk to greet him. "Welcome to the team, Liam. Don't worry, you'll get used to the layout. We're a little spread out, but we get things done," she said, her tone steady but warm. Liam stepped forward, and for the first time since they'd met, their eyes locked, and Jessica saw something shift in his expression. There was recognition, then hesitation. It was subtle, but it was there. He clearly hadn't expected this. The woman he had heard so much about, the quiet sister, the one who was always out of the spotlight, was now the one in charge. The role reversal was striking. Jessica sat back down at her desk, motioning for him to sit across from her. As he did, he placed the folder on the table, but his hands lingered over it, unsure of what to say next. "Liam," Jessica began, breaking the silence, "we'll go over the financial plan for this quarter, but I thought we'd start by getting to know each other a bit better. You've been in finance for a while, right? How are you adjusting to the transfer?" Liam nodded, still trying to find his footing. "Yeah, I've been with a company in New Jersey for a few years now. It's been a bit of a change, but I'm excited for the opportunity. Just didn't expect it to be this different, if I'm being honest." His voice faltered for a moment, but he quickly composed himself. Jessica smiled again, this time a bit more knowingly. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady. "I understand. It can be a lot to adjust to, especially when you find yourself reporting to someone you didn't expect." Liam's face flushed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He blinked, clearly processing the realization that he was now under Jessica's authority, not beside her as Claire had made him out to be. He looked at the contract on the table between them, then back up at Jessica. I didn't realize," he began, his voice now softer. "I didn't know you were the co-founder. I had no idea." Jessica remained calm, her voice composed as ever. "It's not something I usually talk about," she said simply, But it's the reality of the situation now, and I expect we'll work well together. I've seen the kind of work you do, and I'm confident you'll be a great addition to the team." Liam looked at her for a long moment. "I had no idea," he repeated, almost to himself. Jessica nodded. "I'm sure. A lot of people make assumptions about who I am based on what they see or what they've heard. But they don't really know the full story." Liam finally seemed to collect himself, a faint look of understanding crossing his face. "Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about you. And working with you, Jessica." Jessica gave him a polite smile, her voice steady and calm. "We'll get through it just like any other team. Respect, communication, and hard work. That's all I ask." As Liam stood up to leave, he hesitated once again, looking at Jessica, his eyes softening. "I didn't mean to make things awkward," he said quietly. "I just didn't know." Jessica stood too, offering a reassuring smile. "It's fine, Liam. You don't need to apologize. This was bound to happen eventually. Welcome to Pacific Genomics." He left her office with a quiet nod, still processing the change that had just occurred. And as Jessica watched him go, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about proving a point or making anyone feel guilty. It was simply about letting the truth come to light. Sometimes the truth comes when you least expect it. We often spend so much time hiding parts of ourselves, our accomplishments, our worth, because we fear judgment or rejection. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, whether we're ready for it or not. Jessica didn't need to confront anyone or shout about her success. In this simple exchange, the truth about who she was and what she had accomplished was out in the open, and it was powerful. It wasn't about proving herself to Liam, or to anyone. It was about finally being seen for who she truly was. And now, it was time for Jessica to reflect on what this moment meant for her, and what it would mean for her family too. The phone buzzed on Jessica's desk just after lunch. She had been buried in work all morning, reviewing quarterly reports and strategizing the next steps for the company. But when she saw the name on the screen, Claire, her stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. The silence that had followed her decision to withdraw from her family's birthday celebrations had been broken, and now, her sister was on the other side of that silence, ready to speak her mind. Jessica hesitated for a moment, staring at the phone. She could feel the weight of the conversation pressing on her, but she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. Taking a deep breath, she answered the call. "Nicole." Claire's voice was sharp, angry, with a hint of disbelief. "What did you do? You really let it go that far?" Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She hadn't expected Claire to be calm about it. She was far from it. What she hadn't anticipated was the seething frustration in her sister's voice. "I don't know what you mean," Jessica replied quietly, trying to remain neutral. Claire scoffed, her tone growing more heated. "Oh, come on, Nicole. You knew how important yesterday was. You knew how much it meant to Mom and Dad. And you just dropped everything. You refused to come. Not even a message, nothing. I had to explain to Liam why you weren't there. Why everything was such a mess." Jessica could feel the anger bubbling inside her, but she kept her voice even. "I wasn't the one making a mess, Claire. You and Dad did that when you made it clear that I wasn't welcome." There was a long pause, and Jessica could practically feel Claire's disbelief through the phone. "Are you seriously telling me this? After everything, you're going to blame me and Dad?" "I didn't blame anyone," Jessica replied calmly. "I just stopped pretending. You and Dad have been treating me like I'm invisible for years, Claire. You've been so focused on your perfect little life that you couldn't even see that I was getting worn out. And now you're upset because I didn't follow along. Because I didn't keep playing the role I've been stuck in." Claire's voice cracked slightly, her anger mixing with frustration. "You are my sister, Nicole. And now you're making everything about you just like always. You've always been so distant, so cold. And now, because of your actions, Liam thinks I'm ashamed of him." Jessica felt her chest tighten. It wasn't the anger that hurt the most. It was the realization that Claire still couldn't understand. She wasn't mad at Jessica for standing up for herself. She was mad because her perfect world had been disrupted. "I didn't do anything, Claire. I didn't need to make a scene or cause drama. The truth came out, that's all. And maybe it's uncomfortable, but it needed to happen." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "So that's it then." Claire's voice was low, almost hurt. "You don't care anymore. You just left." Jessica closed her eyes again, gathering the words she had long needed to say. "I didn't leave, Claire. I just stopped giving when no one was giving anything back. For once, I'm choosing myself. And if that means you're upset, then so be it." Claire's response was cold, bitter. "You know what? Fine. Keep living in your little world. Don't expect me to clean up the mess you've made." The line went dead, and Jessica sat there, her hand still gripping the phone. For a moment, she just let the silence settle around her. She had never imagined it would come to this, to her sister being so angry, so unable to understand the decision she had made. It wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about winning. It was about taking back the piece of herself she had been giving away for years. Sometimes when we finally stand up for ourselves, it causes a ripple effect we don't expect. When you choose to stop sacrificing yourself for others, especially those who don't appreciate you, it can feel like you're breaking something. But it's not about breaking anything. It's about rebuilding something stronger. You might not get the understanding or validation you expect right away, and it can hurt. But in the end, the most important thing is that you finally choose to live for yourself. It's a hard lesson, but one worth learning. Now, as the dust settled from her conversation with Claire, Jessica realized something. This wasn't over. The truth had come out, but there was still more to be said, more to be understood. Her family wasn't going to change overnight. And she wasn't sure they ever would. But she didn't need them to change. Not anymore. The next chapter would come with its own challenges. Ones that would force Jessica to question just how much more she was willing to give, how much more she was willing to let go. But this time it would be on her terms. And she was ready to face it. A week had passed since Jessica's last conversation with Claire, and though the silence between them was deafening, there was something undeniably freeing about it. Jessica wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't frustrated either. She had simply let go. Let go of the expectations, let go of the guilt, and let go of the hope that her family would finally see her for who she truly was. But life had a way of dragging the past back in when you least expected it. And on a Sunday afternoon, when the sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, there was a knock on her door. Jessica wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, she found herself face to face with her parents. Her mom, with her tired eyes and frail smile, stood at the threshold holding a small bag. Her father, arms crossed and still bearing that familiar hardness in his gaze, stood behind her. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "Mom, Dad," Jessica said, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "What are you doing here?" Her mother glanced at her father, then back at Jessica. We wanted to talk," her mom said, her voice quieter than usual. Jessica stood there for a moment, unsure whether to let them in or close the door. After a long pause, she stepped aside, wordlessly inviting them in. They moved into her simple living room, where silence filled the space once more. Jessica could feel the years of tension between them, all those unsaid things hanging heavy in the room. Her father was the first to speak. "Nicole," he said, his voice rough, "about your mother's birthday. I said some things I shouldn't have. And maybe we've been a little hard on you." Jessica felt her chest tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. She wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation, but it felt like a moment of reckoning for them. For all the years of giving without receiving, for all the time she'd been overlooked, maybe now was the time they would finally acknowledge her. Her father continued, his words slow, as if each one weighed heavily on him. "Claire, she's been a mess since the breakup. Your mom's been crying non-stop. We wanted to sit down and talk as a family." Jessica didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, her eyes steady, trying to read the room. She had no illusions about what this was. They were here for something, and she knew exactly what it was. She had been down this road before. Her mother, sensing the hesitation, added, "We've thought it through. You're doing well now. Your job is stable, and if possible, we were hoping you could help us out. Just a little, to help with living costs and some savings." Jessica's heart sank as her mother pulled a piece of paper out of the bag she was holding. It was a printed sheet, folded neatly, and Jessica instantly recognized it. A proposal, one that had been carefully considered, no doubt. Her father cut in before she could speak. "We were thinking $2,000 a month. It's not much for someone in your position, but we're family. We thought it could help. With insurance, living expenses." Jessica blinked, her thoughts racing. For the past 2 years, she had given them nearly $16,000, without being asked. They had never once acknowledged it, and now they were asking for more. But this time it wasn't just money. It was conditions. She slowly exhaled, standing up straighter. She felt a strange sense of clarity, something she hadn't felt in years. Her parents were still trying to use her, even after everything that had happened. And they had the audacity to present this like it was a reasonable request. Her voice was calm but firm. "What about Claire? Is she contributing?" Her father hesitated, the words slipping out slowly. "She's not doing well. We can't pressure her, Nicole. She's going through a tough time with the breakup." Jessica's lips curled into a small smile, though it was not one of warmth. "So, I'm the one who gets to help, because I'm doing well now? What happened to family being there for each other? What happened to being enough?" Her father's face flushed red, the veins on his neck tight with frustration. "We raised you for over 20 years, and now when we ask for a little help, you demand a contract. This is unbelievable." Jessica stood still, her heart pounding but her voice unwavering. "It's not a demand, Dad. It's a principle. For 2 years I've silently paid bills, fixed problems, and been invisible. I've given you everything I could, but you never once stopped to ask how I was. This contract is the only way things are going to change. If you want my help, it has to be clear. No more pretending." The silence in the room was deafening. Her father opened his mouth, but no words came out. Jessica could feel the tension in the air, but she didn't flinch. She had already made her choice. Her mother's face softened, and she looked at her father before speaking in a quieter voice. "Maybe we should talk about this." But Jessica had already made her decision. "You've had 2 years to talk, Mom. The only thing I owe you now is respect. And if you want my help, this is how it will be. I won't be treated like a backup anymore." Her father stood up abruptly, slamming his hand on the table. "Unbelievable," he muttered, shaking his head. "I don't owe you an apology for raising you. You owe us for everything we did for you." Jessica's gaze was steady, unshaken. "No, Dad. I don't owe you anything. I did everything I could, but I won't continue this cycle of giving without receiving. I'm done being the one who fixes everything." Setting boundaries is never easy, especially when it comes to family. But sometimes the hardest part is realizing that love and sacrifice are not the same thing. True love doesn't come with conditions or expectations. It's about mutual respect, understanding, and giving without the need to keep score. Jessica's decision to stand firm wasn't just about money. It was about breaking the pattern of being the one who always gave and never received. And in that moment, she realized that her worth wasn't defined by what she could do for others. Her parents left that day, silence hanging in the air between them. But Jessica knew she had made the right choice. The hard part was over, she had stood her ground. The question now was, what would her family do next? Would they accept the new terms, or would they walk away? Whatever happened, Jessica was ready. She had taken the first step toward living life on her own terms. And that, in itself, felt like the biggest victory. The days following her parents' visit were quiet, eerily so. Jessica sat in her apartment, sipping her coffee as she watched the world outside her window. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the soft hum of the city filled the air. But inside her, there was still a quiet storm brewing. She had done what she needed to do, what she had to do, but now that the confrontation was over, she couldn't shake the lingering feeling of guilt. It wasn't that she regretted what she'd said or done. Not really. But there was still a small part of her, the part that had been conditioned for years to please others, to keep the peace, that felt uneasy. She had chosen herself. She had set boundaries. But was it selfish? Was she wrong to let go of the constant pressure of being everything for everyone else? Her thoughts spiraled, and for a moment, she felt the familiar pull of guilt. It was like an old friend she had spent years trying to shake off, always showing up when she made a decision that was for her and not for anyone else. But then something shifted. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded herself, I did not cause this. I did not create this problem. She hadn't built this wall of silence and expectation that had grown between her and her family. They had. She was simply no longer willing to carry the weight of it. Jessica thought back to the countless times she had been the one to fix everything. The bills, the repairs, the late-night phone calls asking for help when no one else stepped in. She had been the one who had always put her family's needs first, even at the expense of her own well-being. But what had it gotten her? Her parents still didn't see her for who she was. And worse, she had lost sight of who she was too. But now she was finally choosing herself. And that was okay. That was more than okay. The phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Liam. The subject line was simple: apology and goodbye. Jessica opened it, her heart beating a little faster. I'm sorry, Nicole. Had no idea. I never should have put you in the middle of all this. After everything that happened, I feel ashamed, but not because of you. I respect you more than ever. I've realized I can't stay in a relationship where respect is so one-sided. I'm ending things with Claire. Can't pretend anymore. Thank you for staying quiet when you didn't have to. You've taught me a lot, more than I realized. Jessica stared at the message for a long moment, her heart swelling. It wasn't about the apology. It wasn't even about Claire or Liam's breakup. It was about something much deeper. It was about the power of silence, of standing still in the face of chaos and letting the truth speak for itself. Jessica didn't need to fight, to yell, to explain. All she had to do was be herself. And in doing so, she had shown Liam, maybe even her entire family, that she was no longer the person they could walk all over. She replied to Liam's message with a simple, calm note. You don't need to apologize, Liam. I never brought family matters into work, but I hope you understand now. Sometimes silence is the greatest strength. Take care. Jessica set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, her thoughts quieting for the first time in days. She had done the right thing. She had taken the hardest step and freed herself from the weight of guilt. Guilt is a heavy burden to carry, especially when you've spent so much of your life trying to please others. But the truth is, guilt only has power when you allow it to. When you choose to live your life for you. When you choose to set boundaries and prioritize your own well-being. You may feel the pull of guilt, but it doesn't have to control you. Jessica's silent victory was not just about standing up to her family. It was about freeing herself from the emotional weight that had defined her for so long. By letting go of the guilt, she reclaimed her peace. And with that peace came clarity. The next chapter of her journey wasn't going to be defined by her family's expectations or her past sacrifices. It was going to be defined by who she wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, Jessica was ready to embrace that. The next step in Jessica's journey would be about fully embracing this newfound freedom. No longer looking back, no longer holding on to the past. And as the days passed, she realized that she didn't need to keep looking for approval from anyone else. She already had everything she needed to create a life that was truly her own. The following weeks felt like a rebirth for Jessica. It wasn't that everything suddenly became perfect, or that the silence with her family was magically filled with warmth. No, the change was more subtle, quieter. But it was real. For the first time in a long time, Jessica felt like she was living on her own terms. She had always been driven, ambitious, and capable, qualities she had never fully recognized in herself until now. But now that the heavy weight of her family's expectations had been lifted, Jessica could breathe again. She no longer needed to hide in the shadows, suppressing her desires and achievements for the sake of keeping the peace. Now she was free to focus on what mattered most: her own happiness, her own goals, and most importantly, her own sense of self-worth. Jessica threw herself fully into her work, but not out of obligation. She was finally pursuing the career she had built from the ground up with clarity and purpose. The hours she once spent feeling drained by the demands of her family were now being used to craft strategies, to lead her team, to make decisions that shaped the future of her company. There was a newfound joy in her work, one that came not from the recognition of others but from her own pride in what she had accomplished. One evening, as Jessica sat at her desk, reviewing financial projections for the next quarter, she received a call from an unexpected number. It was from her mother. "Nicole," her mom began softly, the weariness clear in her voice. "I just wanted to check in. It's been a while, and I thought maybe we could talk." Jessica's first instinct was to hesitate, to shield herself from the past. But then something shifted. She didn't need to rush into this conversation with expectations or old wounds. She could approach it on her terms, with a calmness she had never felt before. "I'm listening, Mom," Jessica replied, her voice steady but open. Her mother continued, I realize now how much we took you for granted. I see now how hard you worked, how much you gave, and how we never really appreciated it. And I'm sorry, Nicole. I really am." Jessica let the words sink in, but she didn't feel the rush of anger or resentment she once might have. Instead, she felt something else, a quiet understanding. Her mom's apology was a start, but it wasn't the end. It was a moment of truth, a crack in the wall that had separated them for so long. "Thank you, Mom," Jessica said softly. "I appreciate that. But I've learned something important. I can't keep living my life for everyone else. I have to live it for me." Her mother was silent for a moment, then whispered, "I understand. I do." The conversation ended with no grand resolution, no promises of change, but there was a shift. The air between them was different now, lighter. Jessica didn't need her mother's approval anymore to feel validated. She had already found her own. The next morning, Jessica woke up feeling a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. As she sat on the balcony of her apartment, watching the city slowly come to life, she realized that she had finally shed the weight of living for others. She was no longer hiding in the background, no longer compromising herself to meet others' expectations. She had stepped into the light, not for her family, not for anyone else, but for herself. Her life was hers to create now. She could make her own choices, pursue her own dreams, and build a future that reflected who she was: strong, capable, and worthy of everything she had worked for. And in that moment, Jessica understood something profound. Empowerment wasn't about proving something to others or demanding validation. It was about knowing your own worth, standing firm in your own truth, and living authentically. Empowerment begins when you stop seeking approval from others and start validating yourself. It's about realizing that you don't need to hide or compromise who you are to make others comfortable. When you embrace your own worth and choose to live authentically, the world around you begins to reflect that strength. Jessica's journey didn't end with her family's recognition or an apology. It ended with her recognizing herself, for the first time, fully and completely. And that recognition was the most powerful transformation of all. As Jessica's story unfolded, it was clear that this was only the beginning. The road ahead was full of challenges, but she knew one thing for sure: no matter what came next, she would face it on her own terms. And for the first time in her life, that was more than enough. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to Jessica's story. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest yet most empowering choice we can make is to choose ourselves, especially when we've spent so long trying to fit into someone else's idea of who we should be. The lesson here is simple, yet profound. Your worth is not determined by how much you give to others or how much they take from you. You deserve respect, love, and recognition, not because of your sacrifices but because of who you truly are. How do you feel after hearing Jessica's journey? Did it inspire you? or maybe make you reflect on your own life? Let us know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. There are so many more powerful stories like Jessica's waiting to be told, and I can't wait to share them with you. Thank you again for listening, and remember, your story matters too. See you in the next video.